The candles had burned all the way down to the metal holders when Damon Hale finally understood that his wife was not coming back that night. He stood at the head of the long dining table, staring at two untouched plates of food that had gone cold hours ago. Her chair was pushed in neatly, as if she had never meant to sit there at all. Outside, the wind pushed against the tall windows of the house, and somewhere in the dark garden, a dog barked twice and went silent. He checked his watch. It was almost midnight. Elena had never once, in 5 years of marriage, missed their anniversary dinner. Not when her mother was sick. Not when the roads were flooded. Not even the year he had come home late with blood on his collar and a story she pretended to believe. She had always been there, sitting across from him, holding his hand over the candles, and laughing at something small, something only the two of them understood. Tonight the chair was empty. Damon picked up his phone and called her number for the 6th time. It rang twice and went to voicemail, the same soft recording of her voice that made his chest tighten now instead of warm. He set the phone down on the table, hard enough that the glass beside it rattled. "Nadia," he called out, his voice sharp and controlled, the voice of a man who had learned long ago never to let fear show in his tone. A young woman stepped into the doorway a moment later, her hands folded in front of her, her eyes already careful. "Sir? When was the last time anyone saw her today?" Nadia hesitated. That hesitation told him more than words could have. "She left after lunch. She said she was going to the flower shop on Bellamy Street. She told the driver she would call him when she was ready to come home." "And did she call him?" "No, sir. He waited outside for 2 hours before he came back to ask what to do." Damon closed his eyes for a moment. 2 hours. Somewhere in those 2 hours, his wife had disappeared from a street he knew well. A street lined with small shops and old brick buildings. A street that should have been safe because it was inside the part of the city he controlled completely. Nothing happened on Bellamy Street without someone telling him about it. Yet somehow, today, his own wife had vanished from it without a single person noticing. He walked past Nadia and up the wide staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time. Their bedroom was exactly as it always was, the bed made, the curtains drawn halfway to let in the last of the evening light. He stood in the doorway and let his eyes move slowly across the room, searching for anything that felt wrong. Her closet door was slightly open. He crossed the room and pulled it wide. Her clothes hung in careful rows, organized by color the way she always kept them. Nothing was missing that he could see. No suitcase gone from its shelf, no coat pulled from its hanger. If she had run, she had not taken anything with her. That thought should have comforted him. Instead, it frightened him more than anything else could have. He moved to the bathroom next, flipping on the light. The room was small and elegant, all white tile and soft lighting, the kind of room Elena had designed herself when they first moved into the house. Her perfume bottle sat in a neat line on the counter. Her toothbrush was still in its cup. Everything looked untouched, ordinary, the way it looked every single morning of their marriage. He almost turned to leave when something caught his eye. A drawer beneath the sink was not quite closed, just a thin line of shadow where it should have been flush against the cabinet. Damon knelt down and pulled it open. Inside, beneath a folded silk scarf that he recognized as one he had given her 2 birthdays ago, was a small white stick, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, as if she had wanted to protect it, or hide it, or both. He lifted it out slowly, already knowing what it was before he turned it over in the light. A pregnancy test. Positive. Damon sat back on his heels on the cold tile floor, the small plastic object heavy in his hand, in a way that had nothing to do with its actual weight. He thought back over the last few weeks, searching his memory for signs he might have missed. Elena had been quieter lately. She had stopped drinking wine at dinner, claiming she wanted to feel better in the mornings. She had gone to the doctor twice without telling him why, saying only that it was nothing important. She had started closing the bedroom door when she made certain phone calls. He had noticed all of it. He had simply been too busy, too consumed with the business, too certain that whatever she was hiding could wait until she was ready to share it, to ask her directly. Now she was gone, and the secret she had been carrying was sitting in his palm, and he had no idea if she had disappeared because of it, or if the two things were connected at all. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He answered without checking who it was. "Talk to me," he said. It was Victor, his oldest friend, and the man who had stood beside him since they were boys, running errands for other men's fathers. Victor's voice was low and careful, the way it always was when he had bad news to deliver. We checked the cameras on Bellamy Street. Every single one on that block went dark for exactly 11 minutes this afternoon. Started at 2:17, came back on at 2:28. Damon stood up slowly, the pregnancy test still in his hand. 11 minutes is not an accident, Victor. No, it is not. Who has the reach to shut down cameras on my own street without me hearing about it first? There was a pause on the line, long enough that Damon could hear Victor breathing, choosing his next words with unusual care. There are only a few families who could manage something that clean. The Callaways have the technical people for it. So does Marek Petrov, if he wanted to make a statement. Petrov hasn't made a move against me in 2 years. Why now? I don't know, Damon, but I think you need to consider something else too. Something goes wrong on your own street, in your own territory, and nobody sees it happen. That kind of quiet takes help from someone who already knows where the blind spots are. Damon understood immediately what his friend was suggesting, and the idea landed like a blow to the chest. Someone inside his own organization, someone who knew the camera schedule, who knew Elena's habits, who knew exactly when and where to make a woman disappear without leaving a single useful clue behind. Get everyone into the main house within the hour, Damon said. Every driver, every guard who was on rotation today. I want to look each of them in the eye myself. And the flower shop? Send 2 men there now. Wake up the owner if you have to. Someone saw something, even if they don't know they saw it. He ended the call and stood alone in the bathroom for a long moment, staring at his own reflection in the mirror above the sink. The man looking back at him did not look like the boss who had built an empire out of nothing, who was feared in 3 different cities, who had never once in his adult life felt truly powerless. Tonight he looked like exactly what he was underneath all of it. A husband whose wife was missing, and a father who had just discovered, in the worst possible way, that he was about to become one. He slipped the pregnancy test back into the tissue paper and placed it gently in his jacket pocket, close to his chest, as if keeping it near him could somehow keep her near him too. Downstairs, the house had come alive with quiet urgency. Men moved through the halls speaking in low voices, phones pressed to their ears, laptops open on the kitchen counter, where technicians tried to pull whatever footage might still exist from before the cameras had gone dark. Damon walked among them like a man carved from stone, giving orders in a voice that never once rose, though everyone in the room could feel the tension radiating off him like heat from a fire. Nadia approached him carefully, holding a small notebook against her chest. Sir, there is something you should know. Mrs. Hale asked me a strange question 3 days ago. Damon turned to face her fully. What did she ask? She wanted to know if I had ever heard of a man named Callum Pierce. I told her I had not. She made me promise not to mention it to anyone, especially not to you. I did not think much of it until now. The name meant nothing to Damon, and that fact alone unsettled him. He knew every name that mattered in his world, every ally and every enemy who had ever crossed paths with his family. A stranger, someone Elena had heard of but he had not, felt like a piece of a puzzle he did not yet understand. Find out everything you can about that name, he told Nadia, quietly. I don't want anyone else in this house to know we are asking. She nodded and disappeared toward the small office at the back of the house, where the family kept its records, old favors, and old debts written down in careful, coded language that only a handful of people could read. Damon walked to the front window and looked out at the driveway, at the black cars lined up like waiting soldiers, at the gate at the end of the long path that led to the road. Somewhere beyond that gate, in a city he thought he controlled completely, his wife was out there, either hiding from danger or trapped inside it, carrying a secret that might be the reason she was gone at all. He thought about the 11 minutes of darkness on Bellamy Street. He thought about the unfamiliar name Elena had asked about, a name kept so carefully separate from him that even her closest friend in the house had been warned to silence. He thought about the drawer beneath the bathroom sink, and the small white stick now resting against his heart, proof of a life neither of them had spoken about yet, a life that might now be in more danger than either of them could have imagined. Behind him, one of his men appeared in the doorway, out of breath from running. "Sir, we found something at the flower shop." Damon turned sharply. "What?" "The owner says Mrs. Hale bought a bouquet of white roses, the same as always. But right before she left, a man came in and spoke to her at the counter. The owner didn't hear what was said. He only remembers that Mrs. Hale went pale, paid quickly, and left without waiting for her change." "Did he get a look at the man?" "Older, tall, wore a gray coat even though it wasn't cold. The owner said something about his voice. He said it had an accent he couldn't quite place, something not from around here." Damon felt something cold settle low in his stomach, a feeling he had not experienced in years, not since the earliest days of his rise, when every shadow had felt like a threat, and every stranger had felt like an enemy waiting to strike. Someone had approached his wife in broad daylight, on a street that was supposed to be safe, and whatever had been said to her had frightened her enough to leave without her change, without calling her driver, without a single word to anyone in the house about where she was going next. She had not simply vanished, she had run. And somewhere out there, carrying his unborn child, and a secret she had guarded even from him, Elena was running from something, or someone, that had followed her all the way home, without either of them ever noticing it was there. Damon closed his hand around the phone in his pocket, the small plastic test pressing against his palm through the fabric of his jacket, and made a silent promise to the empty hallway around him. Whatever had taken his wife from that street, whoever had frightened her enough to disappear without a trace, would learn very soon exactly what it meant to touch something that belonged to him. The search had only just begun, and already, the quiet, ordinary evening of their 5th wedding anniversary had turned into the most dangerous night of his life. He gathered the men in the main hall within the hour, exactly as he had ordered. 12 of them stood in a loose line, drivers and guards and 2 of the younger runners who handled small errands around the property. Damon walked slowly down the row, studying each face, looking for the flicker of guilt or fear that might separate an honest man from a traitor. Most of them met his eyes without flinching. A few could not hold his gaze at all, though he understood that fear alone did not make a man guilty. Fear was simply what happened when the boss of the family stood 2 feet away, with murder behind his calm expression. "Someone shut down 11 minutes of camera footage on Bellamy Street today," Damon said, his voice even and low, carrying easily through the silent hall. "Someone who knew the exact schedule, someone who knew which cameras to touch and when. I am not going to ask who did it, because whoever did it will not admit it standing here in front of me. Instead, I am going to find out on my own, and when I do, that person will wish they had simply told me the truth tonight." No one spoke. The only sound in the hall was the soft tick of the grandfather clock near the staircase, counting away seconds that felt heavier than they should have. Victor stepped forward from the side of the room, his expression grim. "Damon, there's more." One of the drivers, Callum's man, the one who was supposed to be covering the east side of the block today, didn't show up for the check-in an hour ago. His car is still parked near his apartment. His phone is off. Damon's jaw tightened at the name. Callum's man. "You mean the driver who used to work under Marek Petrov before he came to us 2 years ago?" "The same one." It was not proof, not yet. But it was a thread. And Damon had learned long ago that a single thread was often all a man needed to unravel an entire plot. He turned to Victor. "Find him. I don't care if you have to search every room in this city. I want him breathing, and able to talk when you bring him to me." Victor nodded and left immediately, taking 2 of the guards with him. The rest of the room slowly dispersed, sent out with new instructions, new streets to search, new questions to ask of shopkeepers and neighbors, and anyone who might have seen a woman in a pale blue coat, walking too quickly down Bellamy Street, with an armful of white roses. Damon returned to the office at the back of the house, where Nadia sat hunched over an old leather ledger, her finger tracing down a column of names written in faded ink. She looked up when he entered, her face pale in the lamplight. "I found something," she said quietly. "The name Callum Pierce doesn't appear in any of our recent records, but there's an old entry, almost 6 years back, before you and Mrs. Hale were even married. A man by that name worked briefly as a courier for Marek Petrov's people. He disappeared from the records not long after. No explanation given." Damon leaned over the desk, studying the faded handwriting himself. 6 years is a long time to stay hidden and then suddenly reappear. There's something else, Nadia continued, her voice dropping lower, as if she were afraid the walls themselves might be listening. I remember now, a few months after you and Mrs. Hale returned from your honeymoon, she asked me privately if I had ever heard rumors about a courier who betrayed Petrov and vanished afterward. I told her I hadn't. She never brought it up again until 3 days ago. Something about the timing struck Damon as important, though he could not yet see exactly how the pieces fit together. Elena had known about this man, or at least known of him, for years, long before tonight, long before the pregnancy test hidden beneath the bathroom sink. Whatever connected her to Callum Pierce was not new. It was old, buried, something she had carried quietly through their entire marriage without ever once mentioning it to her husband. He thought of every quiet moment between them over the years, every time she had gone still at the mention of Petrov's name during business conversations, every time she had changed the subject when old rivalries came up at dinner. He had always assumed it was simply because she disliked violence, because she preferred not to think about the darker parts of the life she had married into. Now he wondered if there had been something else behind her silence the whole time. "Sir," one of the younger runners appeared breathlessly in the doorway. The men searching near the river found something. A scarf, caught on the fence by the old warehouse district, pale blue, matching the coat the flower shop owner described. Damon was moving before the boy finished speaking, grabbing his jacket from the back of the chair, and heading for the door with Nadia close behind him. The warehouse district sat at the edge of his territory, a maze of old brick buildings and rusted fences that had once housed factories and now stood mostly empty, home only to shadows and the occasional group of men who preferred to conduct their business away from watching eyes. The drive there felt longer than it should have, every red light an agony, every slow car ahead of them an obstacle Damon wanted to simply drive through. When they finally arrived, 3 of his men were waiting near a chain-link fence, flashlights cutting through the darkness. One of them held up a torn piece of pale blue fabric, snagged on a broken piece of wire at the top of the fence, exactly where someone might catch their coat while climbing over in a hurry. Damon took the fabric in his hands and recognized it instantly. It was Elena's scarf, the one she often wore looped loosely around her neck, a habit from her childhood in a colder part of the country. The fence behind it was old and rusted, tall enough that climbing it would have taken real effort, real desperation. She had come this way. She had climbed this fence herself, running from someone, or something, fast enough and frightened enough to leave a piece of herself caught on the wire behind her. "Search every building on this block," Damon ordered, his voice tight with a fear he refused to let show fully on his face. "Every warehouse, every door, every possible hiding place. She was here. She might still be close." The men fanned out immediately, flashlights sweeping across broken windows and rusted metal doors, boots crunching over gravel and broken glass. Damon stood alone for a moment near the fence, holding the torn scarf in his hands, staring out into the darkness of the warehouse district, where his wife had apparently run for her life only hours earlier. He thought about the child she carried, still a secret only hours old to him, already caught up in danger neither of them had asked for. He thought about the 11 minutes of darkness on the cameras, the missing driver, the old name from a faded ledger entry 6 years gone. Somewhere in this tangled web of secrets, his wife was hiding, and every passing minute made him more certain that whatever she was running from had followed her for a very long time before tonight. A shout came from one of the warehouses further down the block, urgent and sharp enough to cut through the night air. Damon's head snapped up, his entire body going still for a heartbeat before he broke into a run toward the sound, the torn scarf still clutched tightly in his fist, his heart pounding with a fear and a hope so tangled together that he could no longer tell which one was driving him forward. Whatever waited inside that building, he was about to find out, and nothing about this anniversary night would ever let him forget it. The warehouse door hung open on a broken hinge, swinging slightly in the night wind, and inside the darkness, Damon could see the shapes of 2 of his men standing over something on the concrete floor. His heart slammed against his ribs as he crossed the threshold, the flashlight beams throwing long shadows across rusted machinery and broken crates. It was not Elena. A man lay on the ground, unconscious, blood matting the side of his head where he had been struck. Damon recognized him immediately as the missing driver, the one who had failed to check in earlier that night. Victor knelt beside him, checking his pulse, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "He's alive," Victor said. "Someone got to him before we did." Damon crouched down, studying the man's face, the torn collar of his shirt, the scrape marks along his knuckles that suggested he had fought back against whoever had attacked him. "Wake him up." One of the guards splashed water from a bottle across the man's face, and after a moment, his eyes fluttered open, unfocused and full of pain. He tried to sit up and immediately groaned, pressing a hand to the side of his head. "Where is she?" Damon asked, his voice low and dangerous, leaving no room for anything but the truth. The driver blinked up at him, recognition slowly dawning through the haze of pain. "Boss, I didn't touch her. I swear on everything I have, I didn't touch her." "Then tell me what happened." The man swallowed hard, glancing nervously at the other men surrounding him before continuing. "I was supposed to watch the east end of Bellamy Street today, like always. Around 2, I got a message on my radio, said there was a change of plan, told me to reposition to the warehouse district instead. I thought it came from Victor's office, so I didn't question it. When I got here, 2 men were waiting. They knew my name. They knew things about me they shouldn't have known. They said if I didn't cooperate, my sister back home would pay for it." "Cooperate how?" "They wanted me to disable the cameras on my section of the street for a short window. I didn't know why. I swear I didn't know it had anything to do with Mrs. Hale. After I did what they asked, they knocked me out. That's the last thing I remember until you woke me up just now." Damon studied the man's face carefully, looking for the smallest sign of deception, but all he saw was genuine fear, the kind that could not easily be faked. Someone had used threats against this man's family to force his cooperation, which meant whoever orchestrated tonight's disappearance had resources far beyond a simple street thief or opportunist. This was planned. This was patient. This had been building for longer than a single afternoon. "Did you get a good look at the 2 men?" Damon asked. One of them had an accent, not from around here. Older, maybe in his 50s. He wore a gray coat, even in this warm weather. The other one barely spoke at all, just stood there like a wall, watching everything. The description matched exactly what the flower shop owner had said about the man who approached Elena at the counter. Damon felt the pieces sliding closer together, though the full picture remained frustratingly out of reach. A man in a gray coat, foreign in his speech, patient enough to plan an elaborate scheme weeks or months in advance, connected somehow to an old, buried name from a ledger 6 years gone. "Get him to a doctor," Damon said, straightening up. "Keep 2 men with him at all times. If his sister is in danger because of tonight, I want her found and protected before morning." As his men carried the injured driver out to a waiting car, Damon walked further into the warehouse, his flashlight sweeping across the empty space. Near the back wall, half hidden behind a stack of broken pallets, something caught the light and glinted softly. He crossed the room and knelt down, finding a single white rose lying on the concrete floor, its petals slightly crushed but otherwise intact. Elena's flowers. She had been here, or close enough to here, and somewhere along the way had dropped one of the roses she had bought only hours earlier, back when the evening had still seemed like an ordinary anniversary and nothing more. Damon picked up the rose carefully, cradling it in his palm as though it might shatter, and stood in the silence of the warehouse for a long moment, letting the weight of the entire night settle over him. His wife was pregnant. His wife had known something about a man from Petrov's old organization for years without telling him. His wife had been threatened, chased, forced to climb a fence in her good coat and run through an abandoned warehouse district in the dark, alone, carrying a secret that had apparently followed her all the way into their marriage. And somewhere out there, she was still running, or hiding, or worse. And every clue he found only deepened the mystery instead of solving it. Meanwhile, 3 miles away, in a small room above a shuttered bakery that had not opened its doors in over a year, Elena sat huddled on a narrow cot, her knees pulled up to her chest, her pale blue coat torn at the sleeve and stained with dust from the fence she had climbed. The room was cold and mostly empty, lit only by a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, but it was quiet, and quiet was the only thing she needed right now. She pressed a hand gently against her stomach, still barely able to believe the truth of what was growing there, still terrified of what it meant for the danger she now carried inside her along with everything else. She had wanted to tell Damon so many times over the past week. She had rehearsed the words a dozen different ways, imagining his face when she finally said them out loud. But every time she came close, the memory of that afternoon in the flower shop had stopped her, the sound of that stranger's voice reminding her exactly why silence had always felt safer than the truth. The door creaked open, and Elena's entire body went rigid before she recognized the figure stepping inside. It was Priya, an old friend from her life before Damon, someone who had known her since they were girls together, long before mafia bosses and hidden pregnancies and men in gray coats had ever entered the picture. Priya was one of only a handful of people who knew where Elena was hiding tonight, and the only one Elena trusted enough to reach out to when everything had fallen apart. "You need to eat something," Priya said quietly, setting a small paper bag on the cot beside her. "You've been sitting like that for hours." "I can't stop thinking about him," Elena whispered. "He must think I left him. He must think I ran away on our anniversary without a single word." "You didn't have a choice, Elena. If that man found you standing in the flower shop in broad daylight, imagine what he would have done if he'd found you at home with your husband standing right there. You did the only thing you could do." Elena closed her eyes, remembering the moment clearly, every detail sharp and painful in her memory. She had been choosing between white roses and pale pink ones when a tall stranger in a gray coat approached the counter beside her, leaning close enough that only she could hear his low, accented voice. "Your husband took something from a man who never forgave him for it," he had said. 6 years, and Marek Petrov has not forgotten a single day of it. You have two choices, Mrs. Hale. You disappear quietly, and no harm comes to the man you love, or you stay, and we take everything that matters to him, starting with you. She had not known what Damon had taken from Petrov all those years ago, before their marriage even began, but the certainty in the stranger's voice had left no room for doubt. He was not bluffing. He knew things about her routine, her habits, even the fact that she was expecting a child, details she had shared with no one outside her own doctor's office. If he knew that much, he could reach her anywhere, at any time, unless she vanished completely and gave Damon time to find the truth on his own terms, away from her, away from danger she had unknowingly carried into their marriage. "I need to find a way to warn him," Elena said, sitting up straighter on the cot. "Not about where I am, just that he's still in danger, that this isn't over just because I disappeared." Priya frowned, worry etched deep into her features. "If you contact him, even for a moment, they might trace it. You heard what that man said. He has people everywhere. I can't just sit here and wait while Damon walks around blind to what's coming for him," Elena said, her voice firm despite the fear trembling underneath it. "There has to be a way to reach him without exposing myself. Someone he trusts completely. Someone outside the family who could pass along a message without anyone suspecting where it came from." Priya was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "There's my cousin, Farouk. He works as a courier sometimes, delivers packages all over the city, has for years. He doesn't know anything about your world, and no one watching your husband's house would think twice about a delivery man showing up at the door." Elena felt a small, fragile flicker of hope for the first time since she had climbed over that rusted fence hours earlier. Would he do it? Would he take that kind of risk without asking questions? "For me, yes. He owes me more favors than I can count. But Elena, you need to think carefully about what you send. Anything too specific could put both Farouk and Damon in danger." Elena nodded slowly, already turning the problem over in her mind. She could not reveal her location, not yet. Not while that man in the gray coat and his people were still searching the city for her. But she could warn Damon that the danger was real, that it stretched back years before their marriage, that someone connected to Marek Petrov had orchestrated everything that happened tonight. She could give him enough to protect himself, even if it meant staying hidden a little longer herself. She reached for the small notebook Priya had brought her earlier, and began to write, choosing her words with the same careful precision she had once used negotiating with her husband's rivals at formal dinners, back when she had still believed that danger was something that only touched other people's lives, never her own. Across the city, In the quiet office at the back of his house, Damon sat with the crushed white rose still resting on the desk in front of him, staring at nothing, running through every possible name and face from his past that might connect back to a man called Marek Petrov and a debt 6 years old. Somewhere in his own memory, he was certain, lay the answer to why his wife had run, and why she had never once told him the truth she had apparently been carrying since long before they ever said their vows to each other. The clock on the wall struck 2 in the morning, and still, there was no sign of her. Victor entered the office quietly, closing the door behind him. He had cleaned the dried blood from his hands, but his shirt was still rumpled from the hours spent searching the warehouse district. He sat down across from Damon without being asked, an old habit from a friendship that had outlasted every rival, every betrayal, every hard year of building an empire from nothing. "You should sleep," Victor said. "Even an hour. You won't be any use to her exhausted." "I can't sleep, Victor. Every time I close my eyes, I see that fence, that torn scarf, and I think about what might be happening to her right now, while I sit here doing nothing." "You're not doing nothing. You've got half the city looking for her. You found the driver. You found the rose. That's not nothing. That's progress." Damon rubbed a hand across his tired eyes. "Progress toward what? I still don't know where she is. I still don't know who this man in the gray coat really is, or why Petrov would wait 6 years to make a move like this." Victor leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "There's something I never told you, because I didn't think it mattered anymore. Back before you and Elena were married, there was a shipment that went wrong. Petrov's people lost a courier, someone carrying documents that could have exposed half his operation to the authorities. He always believed we were behind it, that we tipped off the police to weaken him before we expanded into his territory. Were we behind it?" Victor hesitated, choosing his next words carefully. "I was young then, still finding my place in the family. I heard rumors that someone close to you arranged it, someone who wanted Petrov out of the way before you took full control of the Western docks. I never confirmed who. It was buried a long time ago, and Petrov never had proof, so he never acted on it. Until now, apparently." Damon sat back in his chair, absorbing the weight of this new information. If Petrov believed, even without proof, that Damon's family was responsible for destroying a courier's life and exposing his operation, 6 years of silent resentment could easily explain the patience behind tonight's plan. A man like Petrov would not act rashly. He would wait, gather resources, learn everything he could about his enemy's life, including the woman his enemy loved most, before finally making his move at the moment it would hurt the deepest. "Find out who arranged that shipment," Damon said quietly. "I don't care how deep you have to dig or how many old debts you have to call in. If there's a traitor buried in this family's history, I want their name before the sun comes up." Victor nodded and rose to leave, pausing at the door. "Damon, there's one more thing. The courier who disappeared during that shipment years ago. Some of the old-timers used to whisper his name when they thought no one else was listening. Say it. Callum Pierce." The name hit Damon like a physical blow, connecting instantly to everything Nadia had uncovered in the ledger earlier that night. Callum Pierce, the courier who had vanished from Petrov's records 6 years ago under mysterious circumstances, the same name Elena had asked about only days before her disappearance, the same name that had apparently been buried and forgotten by everyone, except the people who needed to remember it most. "He's alive," Damon said slowly, the pieces finally beginning to form a clearer picture in his mind. "He survived whatever happened during that shipment, and somehow, Elena knew it. She's known about him for years." "Or he found her," Victor said grimly. "Maybe after all this time, Callum Pierce found a way back into the world, working for Petrov now instead of against him, ready to settle an old score that never should have touched your wife in the first place." Damon stood up from his desk, a new and terrible urgency settling into his chest. If Callum Pierce was the man in the gray coat, if he had spent 6 years planning some kind of revenge against the family that had destroyed his life, then Elena was not simply hiding from a stranger's threat anymore. She was caught in the middle of a decades-old grudge that had nothing to do with her at all, forced to pay the price for a decision made long before she ever fell in love with the man responsible for it. "I need to know everything about what happened during that shipment," Damon said. "Every detail, every name, Every possible reason Callum Pierce would want to hurt this family so badly that he'd wait 6 years and then come after an innocent woman to do it. Victor nodded once and left the room, his footsteps fading quickly down the hall as he went to wake the old-timers from their beds if he had to pull the truth from whatever dark corner of the family's history it had been hiding in for far too long. Alone again, Damon picked up the crushed white rose from his desk and turned it slowly in his fingers, thinking of Elena somewhere out in the city, frightened and pregnant, and carrying a burden she should never have had to carry alone. Whatever mistake had been made 6 years ago, whatever debt Callum Pierce believed the family owed him, Damon intended to make certain that his wife and unborn child never paid the price for it. The first pale light of dawn was still hours away, and somewhere in that darkness, the truth was waiting to be uncovered, along with the woman he loved. Farouk arrived at the front gate of Damon's estate just after 9 in the morning, his delivery bike parked awkwardly against the stone wall, a small brown package tucked under his arm. The guards stopped him immediately, patting him down and checking the package for anything dangerous, before allowing him to approach the front door. He kept his expression carefully neutral, exactly as Priya had coached him the night before, though his hands trembled slightly as he handed over the small parcel to the guard who answered the door. "Delivery for Mr. Hale," Farrick said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "Signature required." The guard took the package inside without offering a signature, disappearing down the hallway, while Farrick waited nervously on the front step, hoping he had done enough, hoping the message hidden inside would reach the right hands without anyone else discovering what it truly contained. Inside the house, Damon tore open the package himself, having been told immediately when it arrived that morning. Beneath a layer of ordinary tissue paper, wrapped around a small ceramic figurine that meant nothing to him, he found a folded piece of paper covered in handwriting he recognized instantly. Elena's handwriting, careful and precise, the same handwriting that filled the margins of books on their shared shelves and appeared on birthday cards tucked into his coat pockets over the years. His hands shook slightly as he unfolded the note. "I am safe for now. Please believe that before anything else, I did not leave you, and I did not stop loving you for a single moment since the day we married. There is a man from Petrov's old organization, someone connected to something that happened years before we met, and he has threatened to hurt you if I do not disappear. I do not know everything yet, but I know his name is Callum Pierce, and I know he believes your family destroyed his life 6 years ago. Please be careful. Please do not come looking for me in a way that puts you in more danger. I will find a way back to you when it is safe. I promise you that. There is something else you need to know. Something I should have told you weeks ago, but I was afraid, and now I am running out of time to say it the way I wanted to. You already found it, I think. I am so sorry I did not tell you myself." Damon read the note 3 times before setting it down carefully on the desk, his chest tight with an emotion he could not fully name, something between relief and fury, and a grief so sharp it nearly took his breath away. She was alive. She was safe, for now, and she had reached out to him despite the danger, which meant somewhere in the city, a network existed that he had not yet fully mapped, people willing to help her without his knowledge. He called for Nadia immediately, showing her the note, and asking who had delivered it. Within the hour, his men had tracked down the delivery company Farouk worked for, and within 2 hours, Farouk himself was sitting nervously in Damon's office, sweating through his shirt despite the cool morning air, insisting over and over that he knew nothing except that his cousin had asked him for a simple favor. "Who is your cousin?" Damon asked, his voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable edge of danger beneath it. "Priya," Farouk answered quickly. "She said a friend of hers needed help, someone in trouble, someone who couldn't risk being seen. I didn't ask questions. I never asked where the woman was hiding. I swear on my mother's life, I don't know anything more than that." Damon studied the young man's face, recognizing genuine fear rather than deception, the same instinct that had told him the injured driver was telling the truth the night before. "This Priya, how do I find her?" Farouk hesitated, clearly torn between loyalty to his cousin and fear of the man sitting across from him. "She works at a bookshop on Kellerman Street. I don't know anything about where she took your wife, I promise you that. She kept it from me on purpose, said it was safer that way." Damon sent 2 of his men to the bookshop immediately, though he suspected they would arrive too late, that Priya would already be gone, warned somehow that her cousin's delivery had drawn attention to the entire arrangement. He was right. When his men returned an hour later, they reported that the bookshop had been closed all morning, a small handwritten sign taped to the door claiming a family emergency, and no one in the neighboring shops had any idea where the owner had gone. Elena had moved again, taking every precaution to stay one step ahead of both her enemies and, apparently, her own husband. Meanwhile, in a different, smaller room across the city, in an apartment above a shuttered tailor's shop that Priya had arranged in a panic after hearing that her cousin's delivery had been traced, Elena sat wrapped in a borrowed blanket, her back against the cold wall, listening to Priya pace anxiously across the wooden floor. "They know about Farouk," Priya said, her voice tight with worry. "They know about me. It's only a matter of time before they find this place too." "I never should have sent that note," Elena said quietly, guilt written plainly across her tired face. "I put you and Farouk in danger, and I still don't even know if it reached Damon safely." It reached him. Farouk confirmed the delivery before he shut his phone off completely. "Just like we planned. Whatever happens now, at least your husband knows the truth." Elena pressed a hand against her stomach, a habit she had developed over the past 2 days, a small unconscious gesture of protection toward the life growing inside her. "I keep thinking about what that man said, about something Damon's family did 6 years ago. I don't understand how any of this connects to us, to our marriage, to a life we built together, long after whatever happened between Petrov and Damon's family." "Maybe it doesn't matter how it connects," Priya said gently. "Maybe all that matters right now is staying alive long enough for your husband to end whatever threat is coming for both of you." A sudden knock at the door made both women freeze, their eyes locking in shared terror. Priya moved quietly to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains down at the street below. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, though tension still lined her face when she turned back to Elena. "It's just the landlord," she said, checking on the building. "Nothing unusual." But Elena's heart continued to pound long after the footsteps faded away down the stairs, every sound in the unfamiliar apartment now carrying the weight of possible danger. She thought of Damon somewhere across the city, reading her note, learning the name Callum Pierce for the first time, and she wondered whether the truth she had shared would help him or simply put him in greater danger, drawing him directly into a conflict that had been simmering quietly for 6 long years before either of them had known the other existed. Later that afternoon, while Elena and Priya debated whether it was safe to move locations again, a car pulled up slowly outside the tailor's shop, parking just close enough to watch the building without drawing attention. Inside sat a tall man in a gray coat, watching the entrance with patient, calculating eyes, a phone pressed against his ear. "I found her," Callum Pierce said quietly into the phone, his accented voice carrying no trace of urgency, only the calm certainty of a man who had waited a very long time for this exact moment. "She's been careless, reaching out to old friends, sending messages through couriers who leave a trail even a careless man could follow. I'll wait until dark. No need to rush this." On the other end of the line, a second voice, older and rougher, replied with quiet satisfaction. "Good. Remember, Callum, I don't want her harmed unless it becomes necessary. I want Damon Hale to understand exactly what it feels like to lose everything he loves in a single night, the same way I lost everything 6 years ago because of him and his family. And if he finds us first, he won't. Not in time. But if he does, you know what to do. Make sure he understands this was never about the woman. It was always about him." Callum ended the call and settled back into his seat, his eyes never leaving the door of the tailor's shop, waiting patiently for the sun to set and the city to grow dark enough to make his next move without interference. Inside the small apartment above him, unaware that danger had already found her hiding place, Elena continued making plans with Priya for a future she desperately hoped she would still be alive to see, a future that included her husband, her unborn child, and an end to secrets that had haunted her marriage from the very beginning. The clock was ticking now, faster than either of them realized, and somewhere across the city, Damon was racing against time himself, chasing every lead, every thread of information, desperate to reach his wife, before the man in the gray coat, finally decided that patience alone was no longer enough. Back at the estate, Victor returned late in the afternoon with two of the old-timers from the family's earliest years, men who had worked alongside Damon's father before Damon had ever taken control of the business. They sat stiffly in the study, uncomfortable with the formality of the summons, exchanging nervous glances as Damon paced in front of them. "Tell him what you told me," Victor said, nodding toward the older of the two men, a heavy-set man named Osei, whose hands trembled slightly with age. Osei cleared his throat. 6 years ago, there was a shipment meant to cross through Petrov's territory, documents that would have exposed corruption inside his own operation to certain people in the city government. Your father wanted that shipment stopped before it reached its destination, wanted Petrov weakened enough to make room for our family to expand into the western docks without a fight. "Who arranged for the shipment to be intercepted?" Damon asked. Osei glanced at the other old man beside him before answering. "Your father gave the order, but it was carried out by someone close to him, someone trusted enough to move freely through both territories without raising suspicion. That courier, the one who was supposed to deliver the documents safely, he was betrayed by his own contact inside Petrov's organization, someone who tipped us off in exchange for a place in our family once the operation succeeded." "Callum Pierce," Damon said quietly. "No," Osei said, shaking his head slowly. "Callum Pierce was the courier who was betrayed. He wasn't the traitor. He was the one who lost everything, because someone else sold him out. He was arrested, beaten, accused by his own people of failing his duty, and eventually cast out entirely, left with nothing, no family, no protection, no name left worth anything in this business." Damon stopped pacing, absorbing this new detail that shifted the entire shape of the story he had been piecing together. Callum Pierce was not the villain who had orchestrated tonight's disappearance out of pure ambition or greed. He was a man who had been destroyed 6 years ago, through no fault of his own, sacrificed by both sides of a conflict that had never truly been his to fight, and now, apparently, working alongside Petrov to finally take his revenge against the family responsible for setting the entire betrayal in motion. "Who was the traitor inside Petrov's organization?" Damon asked. "The one who tipped us off in exchange for a place in our family?" The second old man, silent until now, finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "It doesn't matter anymore. He's been dead for years." "His name," Damon said, his patience wearing thin. The old man sighed heavily, as though the weight of the secret had grown too heavy to carry any longer. "His name was Andrei. He came to work for your father shortly after the shipment was intercepted, exactly as promised. He served this family loyally for almost 3 years before he was killed in an unrelated dispute with a rival crew. Whatever debt existed between him and Petrov's people, it died with him. Except Callum Pierce is still alive," Victor pointed out. "And apparently, he spent 6 years believing that our entire family was responsible for the betrayal that destroyed his life, when really, it was one man, already dead, who could never be held accountable for what he did." Damon sat down slowly behind his desk, the full shape of the tragedy finally becoming clear to him. Callum Pierce had lost everything because of a single traitor's greed, a traitor who had long since paid for his own crimes with his life, but the family that had benefited from that betrayal, Damon's own family, had never been forced to answer for the role they played in destroying an innocent man's future. Now, 6 years later, that same innocent man had found a way back into the world through Petrov's organization, and rather than seeking justice through any legitimate means, he had chosen to strike directly at the one thing Damon valued more than anything else in his life. "This isn't just about revenge for Petrov anymore," Damon said quietly. "This is personal for Pierce. He's not simply following orders. He's trying to take something from me, the way something was taken from him." Victor nodded grimly, which means he won't stop just because we offer him money, or even an apology. Men like that, men who've lost absolutely everything, they don't want compensation. They want the world to feel exactly what they felt. Damon rubbed his temples, feeling the exhaustion of the past 24 hours settling deep into his bones, though sleep remained impossible, while Elena's fate hung uncertain somewhere across the city. He thought of the note in her careful handwriting, the fear evident in every line despite her attempt to sound brave, the unfinished confession about the pregnancy she had clearly wanted to share with him herself, in person, at a time and place of her own choosing, rather than through a stranger's borrowed phone or a hurried scrawl on a torn piece of paper. "I need to find Priya's bookshop connections," Damon said, standing up with renewed determination. "If she helped Elena hide once, she'll have moved her by now, but she won't have gone far. People panic and run to what feels familiar, even when they know it's risky." "I'll pull everything we have on her," Victor said. "Family, friends, any properties connected to her name or her relatives." As Victor left to begin the search, Nadia appeared in the doorway once more, her expression grave. "Sir, one of our contacts at the police department just called. A patrol car reported an unfamiliar black sedan parked near Kellerman Street for the past 2 hours. No plates registered to anyone local." Damon's blood ran cold at the mention of the street where the bookshop stood, the very place his men had already visited and found closed earlier that day. If Callum Pierce or his associates had circled back to watch the shop themselves, it meant they were following the exact same trail Damon's own people had uncovered, which meant they were likely only steps away from finding wherever Elena had relocated to next. "Get every available man to Kellerman Street immediately," Damon ordered, already moving toward the door himself, grabbing his jacket from the back of the chair. "And someone find out where Priya actually lives, not where she works. If she's protecting my wife, she wouldn't leave her alone in an unfamiliar apartment without checking on her constantly." The house erupted into motion once again, cars pulling out of the driveway within minutes, Damon in the lead vehicle, his jaw set with a grim determination that left no room for doubt or hesitation. Somewhere across the city, the sun was beginning to lower toward the horizon, and with every passing minute of daylight lost, the danger surrounding his wife grew sharper, closer, and infinitely more real. Darkness fell over Kellerman Street, just as Damon's car turned the final corner, headlights sweeping across rows of shuttered shops and quiet apartment buildings. He spotted the unfamiliar black sedan immediately, parked exactly where the police report had described it, empty now, its owner nowhere in sight. His stomach tightened with a fear he refused to let show on his face as he stepped out of the car, motioning for his men to spread out silently along the block. "Check every building," he said quietly, "especially anything above a closed shop. That's where I'd hide someone if I wanted them close but out of sight." The men moved swiftly and silently through the darkening street, checking doors and alleyways with practiced efficiency. Damon walked toward the old tailor's shop near the end of the block, something about the darkened windows above it catching his attention, a faint flicker of light visible through a gap in the curtains on the second floor. He tried the door at street level and found it locked, but a narrow side alley led to a rusted metal staircase climbing up the side of the building. Damon took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding, every instinct screaming at him to hurry, even as caution demanded he move carefully, quietly, in case danger waited just beyond the door at the top. Inside the apartment, Elena sat frozen on the narrow bed, her eyes wide with terror, staring at the door that had just been forced open. But it was not Callum Pierce standing in the doorway. It was Priya, breathless and pale, having just returned from checking the street below. "There's a car outside," Priya said urgently. "Black sedan, been sitting there for hours. I think they found us." Elena rose quickly from the bed, her hand instinctively moving to protect her stomach. "We need to leave now." But before either woman could move toward the door, it swung open again, and this time, it was not Priya standing there. Callum Pierce stepped into the small apartment, his gray coat catching the dim light from the single bare bulb overhead, his expression calm and almost gentle, despite the danger radiating from his presence. "Mrs. Hale," he said quietly, "I was hoping we could speak without your husband's men storming the building. It seems that hope may not last much longer." Elena stood her ground, despite the fear coursing through her, positioning herself slightly in front of Priya, in an instinctive attempt to shield her friend from danger. "Whatever happened between you and Damon's family, I had nothing to do with it. I didn't even know your name until a few days ago." "I know," Callum said, his voice carrying no anger, only a deep, exhausted sadness that seemed to weigh down every word. "You're innocent in all of this, just as I was innocent 6 years ago. But innocence has never mattered much in this world, has it? I learned that lesson the hard way, and now your husband is about to learn it too. Please, Elena said, her voice steady, despite the trembling in her hands. I'm pregnant. Whatever debt you believe Damon's family owes you, punishing me won't bring back whatever you lost. It will only create more suffering, more innocent people caught in the middle of something that was never their fault. Something shifted briefly in Callum's expression, a flicker of hesitation crossing his weathered face before it hardened again into cold resolve. Petrov wants your husband to suffer the way I suffered. He believes that taking you will accomplish that. I am simply here to make sure it happens according to plan. Outside, the sound of footsteps on the metal staircase grew louder, urgent and heavy, and Callum's head turned sharply toward the door. Elena's heart leapt with sudden hope, recognizing the rhythm of those footsteps even through the fear clouding her thoughts. Damon burst through the doorway a moment later, his eyes immediately finding Elena across the small room, relief and fury warring plainly across his features, before his attention snapped fully to the tall man in the gray coat standing between them. Behind him, two of his men filled the narrow hallway, weapons ready but waiting for his signal. Let her go, Damon said, his voice low and controlled, despite the storm of emotion visible in his eyes. This is between you and me, Pierce. It has nothing to do with her. Callum studied Damon carefully, an unreadable expression settling over his face. Your father destroyed my life 6 years ago, and never once looked back to see the wreckage he left behind. You built this empire on the ruins of men like me, and you never even knew my name until this week. You're right, Damon said, surprising everyone in the room, including himself. I didn't know your name. I didn't know what happened to you. If I had known, I would have made it right years ago. What my father's people did to you was wrong, and the man responsible for betraying you paid for it with his own life long before tonight. But my wife had nothing to do with any of it. She's innocent, exactly like you were innocent 6 years ago. For a long moment, Callum said nothing, his gaze moving slowly between Damon and Elena, weighing something invisible in his mind that none of them could fully see. The tension in the room stretched thin enough to feel like something physical, every person present holding their breath, waiting to see which way the scale would finally tip. Petrov is watching from outside, Callum said finally, his voice quieter now. If I let her walk out of here without incident, he'll assume I failed, and he won't be forgiving about it. Then let me deal with Petrov, Damon said. You said it yourself, this was never truly about my wife. It was about justice for what happened to you. I can give you that justice without a single innocent person getting hurt tonight. Elena watched the exchange with her heart pounding painfully in her chest, hardly daring to breathe as she waited to see whether Damon's words would be enough to change the course of the night. Priya stood frozen beside her, gripping her arm tightly, both women, too afraid to move or speak and risk disrupting whatever fragile balance existed in the room. Callum finally lowered the hand that had been resting near his coat pocket, a small gesture that seemed to release some of the tension gathered in the room. If this is a trick, Hale, I promise you, it will be the last mistake you ever make. It's not a trick, Damon said firmly. You have my word. Slowly, cautiously, Callum stepped back from Elena, allowing her space to move toward her husband for the first time since her disappearance. She crossed the room quickly, and Damon pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly enough that she could feel the frantic beating of his heart against her own chest. Relief and love and fear all tangled together in the desperate strength of his embrace. But the moment of relief was short-lived. A sudden commotion erupted from the staircase outside, shouts and the sound of a struggle breaking out below, followed by a single sharp gunshot that echoed through the narrow stairwell and froze everyone in the room instantly. Petrov's men, Callum said grimly, turning toward the door. He doesn't trust me to finish this alone. He never did. Damon pushed Elena gently behind him, positioning himself between her and the door as his own men moved quickly to secure the entrance, weapons raised, voices sharp with urgent commands. More gunfire erupted somewhere below, closer this time, the sound of chaos spreading rapidly through the small building. There's a back exit, Priya said suddenly, her voice shaking but clear. Through the tailor's storage room, leads out to the alley, on the other side of the block. Take her, Damon said to Victor, who had appeared in the doorway moments earlier, his own weapon drawn and ready. Get Elena and Priya out through the back. Now, I'll handle things here. I'm not leaving you, Elena said fiercely, grabbing his arm. You're carrying our child, Damon said, his voice softening, even as urgency colored every word. I need you safe, more than I need anything else in this world. Please, Elena, trust me one more time tonight. Their eyes met for a long, charged moment. Years of love and trust compressed into a single, silent exchange between them. Finally, Elena nodded, allowing Victor to guide her and Priya quickly toward the back of the apartment, disappearing through the storage room door, just as the sound of footsteps grew louder on the stairs outside, closer now, more numerous than before. Callum turned back to Damon, his expression grim but resolute. Petrov brought more men than I expected. If we're going to survive tonight, we don't have much time to decide whose side we're really on. Damon met his gaze steadily, an unlikely alliance forming in the chaos of the moment. Then let's make sure Petrov regrets ever sending them. Outside, the sound of gunfire grew louder still, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the old tailor's shop, the final confrontation of this long and dangerous night was only just beginning. In the alley behind the building, Victor moved quickly, one hand gripping Elena's arm, the other guiding Priya along the narrow, uneven path between the brick walls. The sound of the struggle above them echoed strangely in the enclosed space, muffled shouts and sharp cracks of gunfire that made Elena's whole body flinch with every new burst of sound. This way, Victor said, pulling them toward a gate at the end of the alley that led out onto a quieter side street where a second car waited, one of the drivers standing anxiously beside it, engine already running. They had almost reached the gate when a figure stepped out from the shadows ahead of them, blocking their path entirely. Elena froze, recognizing the second man from the flower shop description, the silent one who had stood like a wall while Callum delivered his warning days earlier. He held a weapon loosely at his side, his eyes calculating as he studied the three of them. Petrov wants the wife, the man said flatly. Not the driver, not the other woman, just her. Victor stepped forward immediately, placing himself between Elena and the stranger. You'll have to go through me first. The man's eyes narrowed slightly, weighing the odds, clearly unwilling to waste time on a drawn-out confrontation, while chaos still raged above them in the building. He raised his weapon slightly, and for a terrifying moment, Elena believed the night was about to end in tragedy, despite everything they had already survived. Priya moved first, faster than anyone expected, throwing the heavy bag she had been carrying directly at the man's head with surprising force. It struck him hard enough to knock him off balance for just a moment, and Victor used the opening immediately, closing the distance between them and driving the man back against the brick wall with practiced efficiency. A brief, brutal struggle followed, ending only when Victor managed to disarm him completely, leaving the stranger slumped against the wall, dazed and no longer a threat. Go, Victor said urgently, pushing Elena and Priya toward the gate. Get to the car. I'll make sure he doesn't follow. Elena hesitated for only a moment, glancing back toward the building where Damon remained, still fighting alongside a man who had every reason in the world to hate him, an unlikely alliance she prayed would hold long enough to bring her husband back to her safely. Go, Victor repeated firmly, and this time Elena obeyed, allowing Priya to pull her the rest of the way through the gate and into the waiting car, her heart torn between relief at her own escape and terror for the husband she had just left behind, in the middle of a battle that was far from over. Back inside the apartment building, Damon and Callum fought their way down the narrow staircase together, an uneasy partnership born entirely out of necessity, each man trusting the other only as far as the immediate danger required. Two of Petrov's men lay wounded on the stairs behind them, and Damon's own men held the ground floor entrance, exchanging fire with at least 3 more attackers positioned somewhere near the street outside. How many did Petrov send? Damon shouted over the noise, pressed against the wall beside Callum as bullets struck the plaster near their heads. More than I told you, Callum admitted grimly. He never fully trusted me to finish this alone. I should have expected this. Then let's finish it together, Damon said, checking his weapon before moving quickly toward the ground floor, Callum close behind him, the two men working with a strange, unspoken coordination that neither had expected only hours earlier. The fighting outside the building was brief but fierce, ending only when Damon's reinforcements arrived, cutting off Petrov's remaining men from any possible retreat. When the gunfire finally fell silent, Damon stood in the street outside the tailor's shop, breathing hard, blood trickling from a shallow cut along his temple, where a bullet had grazed too close for comfort. Callum stood a short distance away, lowering his weapon slowly, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the aftermath of the battle. Petrov will know by now that his plan failed. He won't stop here. No, Damon agreed. He won't. But tonight, at least, my wife is safe, and that's more than I can say I was certain of a few hours ago. Callum studied him for a long moment, something shifting behind his tired eyes. What happens now, Hale? You have every reason to kill me where I stand, for everything I put your wife through tonight. Damon considered the question carefully, thinking of everything Osei and Victor had uncovered about the betrayal that had destroyed this man's life 6 years earlier, a betrayal orchestrated by Damon's own father and carried out by a traitor who had long since escaped any real justice for his crimes. You lost everything because of choices my family made, choices you had no part in and no control over. I won't pretend that debt disappears just because tonight ended without more bloodshed. Then what do you propose? A different kind of justice, Damon said. Not against my wife, not against my family as a whole, but against Petrov himself, the man who spent 6 years manipulating your pain for his own advantage instead of ever offering you the truth or the compensation you actually deserved. Callum said nothing for a long moment, weighing the offer carefully, the weight of 6 long years of anger and grief visible in every line of his exhausted face. Finally, he nodded once, slowly, a fragile agreement forming between 2 men who had begun the night as enemies and were ending it as something far more complicated, not quite allies, but no longer simply adversaries either. Across the city, in the back of a moving car, Elena finally allowed herself to breathe, Priya's hand gripped tightly in her own, both women shaking with the aftermath of everything they had just survived. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a message from Victor confirming that Damon was safe, that the immediate danger had passed, and that they would be reunited again soon, once the chaos of the night finally settled into something resembling peace. Elena closed her eyes and pressed a hand gently against her stomach, tears finally spilling freely down her cheeks, relief and exhaustion and love all tangled together in a single overwhelming wave. The anniversary that had begun in fear and disappearance was ending, somehow, in survival. Though she knew even now that the deeper truths of this dangerous night, the full reckoning with Petrov and the family's buried history, were far from finished. 3 days passed before Damon finally allowed himself to believe that the immediate danger had truly ended. Petrov had gone silent after the failed attack near the tailor's shop, retreating into whatever shadows he still commanded, licking his wounds and reconsidering his next move, now that his plan had collapsed, and his own former courier had turned against him in the final hour. Damon knew the silence would not last forever, but for now, it was enough to let him breathe, to let him hold his wife each night, without the constant fear that she might vanish again before morning. Elena had returned home the same night of the battle, exhausted and shaken, but unharmed, and the following days had passed in a strange, quiet blur of relief and lingering fear. She barely left Damon's side, and he found himself checking on her constantly, unable to shake the memory of that empty dining room chair, the torn scarf on the fence, the crushed white rose on the warehouse floor. On the 3rd evening, Damon found her sitting alone on the balcony off their bedroom, watching the sun set over the city, her hand resting gently on the small curve of her stomach that had only just begun to show. He joined her quietly, settling into the chair beside her without a word, content simply to sit in her presence after everything they had survived. I need to tell you everything, Elena said softly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Not just what I wrote in that note. All of it, from the beginning. Damon reached for her hand, holding it gently in his own. I'm listening. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts before continuing. 6 years ago, before we ever met, I worked briefly for a law firm that handled cases connected to the city's shipping industry. I never knew the details at the time, but I remember a case involving a courier who was accused of betraying his employer, a case that was quietly dropped before it ever reached trial. I only learned the courier's name recently, when a woman I used to work with mentioned it in passing, completely unaware of any connection to my own life. Callum Pierce, she said, His case had been one of the strangest she'd ever seen, dropped so suddenly and completely that everyone at the firm assumed powerful people were involved. "And you connected that name to Petrov's organization," Damon said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. "I did some quiet research on my own, just curiosity at first, nothing more. When I learned how deeply that case connected to your family's history, I panicked. I didn't want to bring that darkness into our marriage, into the life we were building together. I told myself it was ancient history, something that happened before we even met, something that had nothing to do with us anymore. I was wrong." Damon squeezed her hand gently. "You should have told me. All those years of carrying that secret alone, wondering if it would ever come back to hurt us." "I know that now," Elena said, tears gathering in her eyes. "I was afraid of what it might mean for us, for the life we'd built. And then, when I found out I was pregnant, I became even more afraid, terrified that bringing a child into this world meant bringing them into danger too. Danger, connected to secrets I should have shared with you from the very beginning." Damon pulled her gently into his arms, holding her close, as the last light of the setting sun painted the sky in soft shades of orange and gold. "We're going to face whatever comes next together. From now on, no more secrets between us, no matter how frightening the truth might seem." Elena nodded against his chest, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of relief that had been building inside her for days. "I'm sorry I ran, instead of trusting you with the truth from the start." "You ran to protect me," Damon said softly. "I understand that now, even if I wish desperately that you had trusted me enough to face it together from the very beginning." They sat together in comfortable silence for a long while, watching the city lights begin to flicker on below them as darkness settled gently over the horizon. Finally, Elena spoke again, her voice steadier now, filled with a cautious hope that had been absent since the terrifying moment she first learned her life was in danger. "What happens with Callum now, and with Petrov?" Damon considered the question carefully before answering. "Callum has agreed to help us gather evidence against Petrov, proof of years of corruption and cruelty that extends far beyond what happened to him 6 years ago. We're working together now, carefully, to make sure Petrov finally faces consequences for everything he's done, not just to Callum, but to countless others who never had the power to fight back against him." "And Callum himself? What happens to him once this is over?" "I've offered him a place in the organization, if he wants it," Damon said. "A chance to rebuild the life that was stolen from him, on his own terms this time, with real protection and real respect, instead of the empty promises Petrov offered him for 6 long years." Elena smiled softly, relief and gratitude mingling in her tired eyes. "That's a good thing you're doing, Damon, turning something so painful into a chance for something better." "It's the least I can do," Damon said quietly. "My family's mistakes cost that man everything he had. The least I can offer now is a real chance to build something new." A soft knock interrupted their quiet moment, and Nadia appeared in the doorway, her expression carrying a mixture of caution and something close to hope. "Sir, there's someone here to see you both. He says it's important." Damon and Elena exchanged a glance before rising together, walking hand in hand down to the main hall where Callum Pierce stood waiting, his gray coat replaced now with simpler, ordinary clothing that made him look less like a shadow from the past and more like a man beginning to rebuild his future. "I have news," Callum said without preamble. "Petrov is preparing to leave the city. He knows his position has collapsed, knows that between the evidence we're gathering and the loyalty he's lost among his own people after tonight's failed attack, his time here is finished." "Where is he going?" Damon asked. "I don't know yet, but I intend to find out, and when I do, I'll make sure he faces justice for everything he's done, not just to me, but to your family as well." Elena stepped forward, studying the man who had once threatened her life, but now stood offering his help instead. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for choosing mercy that night, even after everything you'd lost because of decisions that were never truly mine or Damon's to answer for." Callum's expression softened slightly, years of hardened grief giving way, just for a moment, to something gentler underneath. "You reminded me of something I had almost forgotten, Mrs. Hale. Not every person connected to an old debt deserves to pay for it. I'm glad I remembered that in time. As the weeks passed, Petrov's influence in the city crumbled steadily, weakened by the evidence Callum and Damon's people gathered together, piece by careful piece, until even his most loyal allies began distancing themselves from a man clearly on the verge of total collapse. Damon never learned exactly where Petrov eventually fled, but he learned enough to know the man would never again hold the kind of power that had once allowed him to threaten an innocent woman, simply to settle an old, misplaced grudge. Months later, on a quiet evening, much like the one that had begun this entire dangerous chapter of their lives, Damon and Elena sat together at the same long dining table, candles glowing softly between them, though this time the chair across from him was not empty. Elena sat there smiling, her hand resting on the now noticeably rounded curve of her stomach, no secrets left unspoken between them, no shadows from the past still hanging unresolved over their future. "Happy anniversary," Damon said softly, raising his glass toward her across the table. "Happy anniversary," Elena echoed, her smile warm and genuine, free at last from the fear and uncertainty that had haunted her for so many months. "Though I think this year, we should celebrate quietly, just the two of us. No flower shops, no mysterious strangers." Damon laughed softly, reaching across the table to take her hand in his own. "Just the three of us, actually," he said gently, glancing meaningfully toward her stomach. Elena's smile widened, tears of happiness gathering in her eyes as she squeezed his hand tightly. "Just the three of us," she agreed softly, and for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, the future ahead of them felt entirely safe, entirely their own, built at last on nothing but truth and love and the unbreakable promise they had made to each other, to face whatever came next together, no matter what shadows from the past might still occasionally rise to test them. Outside, the city lights glittered peacefully beneath a clear night sky, and inside the quiet dining room, the family that had nearly been torn apart by secrets and danger sat together at last, whole and unafraid, ready to begin the next chapter of their lives, with nothing left hidden between them. Later that night, after the candles had burned low and the dishes had been cleared away, Elena walked slowly through the house with Damon beside her, pausing outside the small room at the end of the upstairs hallway that had once been used for storage. Over the past few weeks, workers had transformed it quietly, painting the walls a soft, warm yellow, assembling a crib near the window where morning light would fall gently across it each day. "I still can't quite believe it's real," Elena said softly, running her hand along the edge of the crib. "A few months ago, I was hiding in an abandoned building, terrified I might never see you again, and now here we are, preparing a nursery like none of it ever happened." Damon wrapped his arms gently around her from behind, resting his chin lightly against the top of her head. "It happened," he said quietly, "and we survived it together. That's what matters now. Not the fear we carried before, but the life we're building, because we made it through to the other side." Elena turned in his arms to face him, studying his features in the soft evening light, the strong, steady man she had married 5 years earlier, the man who had torn apart half the city searching for her, who had found an unlikely ally in a man who once threatened everything they held dear, who had chosen mercy and justice over pure vengeance, even when vengeance would have been the easier path. "I used to be afraid that the life you led would always keep some part of you separate from me," she admitted quietly. "That there would always be secrets, dangers, I couldn't fully understand or share. But watching you these past months, watching how you handled everything with Callum, with Petrov, with the truth about your family's past, I understand now that we're stronger facing all of it together than we ever were trying to protect each other through silence." "No more silence," Damon promised, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "Whatever comes next, whatever challenges we face as parents, as partners, we face them honestly, side by side." From somewhere downstairs, Nadia's voice called up gently, letting them know that Victor had arrived for a brief visit, along with news that Callum had sent word about Petrov's current location, information that would need careful discussion in the coming days. But for tonight, standing together in the soft light of the nursery they had built out of hope rather than fear, Damon and Elena allowed themselves simply to exist in the quiet peace of the moment, unwilling to let even important business steal away the fragile, hard-won happiness they had fought so desperately to protect. They walked downstairs together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever news awaited them, no longer as a husband keeping secrets from his frightened wife, or a wife running alone into danger to protect the man she loved, but as true partners, bound together by truth, by resilience, and by the unbreakable promise of the family they were building, one honest day at a time, long after the fear of that terrifying anniversary night had finally faded into nothing more than a story. They would one day tell their child about the darkness they had faced, and the love that had carried them safely through it. Victor stood waiting in the front hall, a folder tucked under his arm, his expression calm despite the weight of the news he carried. Callum says Petrov has settled somewhere along the coast, far enough from here that he believes himself safe from consequence. He's already made contact with local authorities there, quietly, through channels that won't trace back to any of us. Damon accepted the folder and skimmed through it briefly, nodding slowly as he absorbed the details. Good. Let the law finish what we started, cleanly, without more bloodshed than necessary. There's also this, Victor added, producing a second, smaller envelope from inside his jacket. Came for you both this morning. No return address, but the handwriting looked familiar. Elena took the envelope curiously, opening it to find a short letter written in Callum's careful hand. She read it aloud, her voice warm with quiet emotion. I wanted you both to know that I've taken the position you offered, Damon, though I intend to spend the next several months finishing what we started, before I settle into anything resembling a normal life. For the first time in 6 years, I feel like the ground beneath me is solid again. Thank you for choosing to see me as more than an old debt to be paid or feared. Please give my regards to your wife, and my congratulations on the child you're both clearly overjoyed to welcome. Some debts, it turns out, can still be repaid with kindness instead of blood. Elena folded the letter gently, tucking it back into its envelope with careful hands. He sounds different already, lighter somehow. People can change, Damon said quietly, when they're finally given a real chance instead of empty promises. Victor said his goodbyes shortly after, leaving the house quiet once more, the soft glow of lamplight spilling warmly across the front hall as Damon and Elena climbed the stairs together toward their bedroom, the events of the day settling comfortably into the rhythm of an ordinary evening at last. Before turning off the light, Elena paused at the window, looking out over the dark garden below, remembering the frightened woman who had climbed a rusted fence months earlier, running alone into the unknown rather than risk the man she loved. That woman felt distant now, a memory rather than a lingering wound, replaced by someone steadier, someone who had learned that real strength came not from carrying burdens alone, but from trusting the people who loved her enough to carry them together. Come to bed, Damon said softly from behind her, his voice warm with quiet contentment. Elena turned from the window, crossing the room to join him, leaving the curtains open just slightly so the moonlight could spill gently across the quiet room. A small, peaceful symbol of the life they had fought so hard to protect, no longer hidden, no longer afraid, simply theirs, together, for every anniversary still to come.